is not smart to understand the pressure that these 3 Democrat senators are placing on him. 1, has your office taken any steps to restrict cooperation with the investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller? If so, why? It's like they're taking a deposition. 2, did any individual from the Trump administration or anyone acting on its behalf encourage Ukrainian government or law enforcement officials not to cooperate with the investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller? 3, now this is to a foreign prosecutor of another government. Was the Mueller probe raised in any way during discussions between your government and U.S. officials, including around the meeting of Presidents Trump and Poroshenko in New York in 2017? So these 3 Democrats, powerful Democrats, are saying to the general prosecutor, a senior official in the Ukraine administration, you better be investigating Donald Trump. You better be assisting this special counsel. And we have some specific questions. If not, why not? When did you last talk to Trump in 2017? And on and on and on. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable, I think, in a couple levels, Mark. First of all, you're right. I mean, the tone is it's a very direct legal document, basically saying we're watching you and we expect your cooperation. And the threat is somewhat implied because if you look at those 3 members of the Senate, anybody in Ukrainian authority, and certainly this gentleman would knows that the purse strings of Ukrainian aid runs through Congress. And if you've got individuals who are on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for example, they need to sign off on any sort of budgetary authority. So it's very troubling. And again, it shows this double standard. Certain people are to be investigated. Certain people are not. Foreign officials are supposed to cooperate with certain investigations, not cooperate with others. And I think this is one of the things that drives Americans crazy. I know people, I know you know people that are generally apolitical. They're not that engaged, but what they are concerned about and frankly very angry about is the fact that we seem to have a 2-tiered system of justice. Certain political figures get investigated, others don't. There's a certain level of expectation of cooperation with some and not with others. And this kind of goes to the heart of the matter. All the hysteria of the buildup to sort of the Trump conversation, the Ukrainian president, was predicated on these sort of exaggerated notions of this threatening tone, the fact that it was tied to aid, the fact that he wanted him to basically finger Biden.
All lies.
Exactly. It comes out and it's very conversational. It's saying, hey, just talk to my attorney general.
Well, let's get to this. We and the world now has this transcript, which is extraordinary. This is the first-hand account by a number of people who take notes during the course of the president's conversation. They get together, they compare their notes, then they write this up. There's not a recording. I don't know of another time when a transcript of this sort has ever been released, ever. And, others have been saying, well, why don't we have a transcript of Joe Biden's conversation when he wanted that prosecutor fired?
Right.
Or his other various conversations with the Ukrainians. How about his conversations with the Chinese, which we'll get to soon? For that matter, what about Obama's conversations with heads of states? Those would be fascinating. Right. But only Trump and only this conversation, because we have a whistleblower who's not a whistleblower, who doesn't have firsthand knowledge of anything. Matter of fact, we now know more than the whistleblower.
Correct.
We have the transcript, but they still want to hear from the whistleblower,
right,
who just happens to be represented by a lawyer who worked for Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer.
Right.
I think the American people are going to have about enough of all this. So we read this transcript. You and I have read this transcript. What the television graphics aren't showing is there's a long discussion about all kinds of things, corruption in the Ukraine, how you can work better with us. And during the course of this conversation, this was not a phone call where Donald Trump calls the newly elected president of the Ukraine and says, hey, by the way, we've got military aid that you want. I want to get Biden. Now, what are you going to do about it? There's nothing like that in here.
Right.
Zippo.
Right.
It's conversational. And here's the part. Ready? I heard a prosecutor, and this is part of a long conversation, where the president of Ukraine is actually bringing up investigations more than the president of the United States. I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. A lot of people are talking about that. The way they shut your very good prosecutor down, and you had some very bad people involved. Mr. Giuliani is a highly respected man. Now, he wasn't the first one to bring up Giuliani. The president of Ukraine brought up Giuliani. And he says he was the mayor of New York City, a great mayor, and I would like him to call you. And I will ask him to call you along with the Attorney General of the United States. So basically, he's going through proper channels. Rudy very much knows what's happening, and he's a very capable guy. If you could speak to him, that would be great. Again, it was the president of the Ukraine who first brought up Rudy Giuliani. The former ambassador from the United States, the woman, was bad news, an Obama appointee. And the new people she was dealing with in the Ukraine were bad news. So I just want to let you know that. The other thing, there's a lot of talk of Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Is he demanding a criminal investigation of Joe Biden here?
Imagine putting that next to Joe Biden's version of his conversation with Ukrainian authorities to get the prosecutor fired.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stark.
I have to take a break. I want you to pick up right where we left off.
Right.
Your interpretation of this versus the media's interpretation. We'll be right back.
New York. New developments in the investigation that has sparked an impeachment inquiry against President Trump. Fox News has learned that the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, worked, quote, off the books with two high-profile pro-Trump lawyers to try to get dirt on Joe Biden from Ukrainian officials. Giuliani denies he did so. Fox News has also learned Mr. Trump decided on his own to withhold military aid to Ukraine this summer, funds that the Pentagon, State Department, and National Security Council had unanimously approved. Meanwhile, a potential life-threatening situation in parts of the western states. People there are getting buried by as much as 3 feet of heavy, wet snow. High winds also a problem, toppling trees and power lines. Parts of Montana are under a winter storm emergency right now. I'm Jackie Ibanez. Now back to life, liberty, and Levin. Have a great night.
So where we left off, Peter Schweizer, I just read from the transcript. Remarkably, it's been released by the President of the United States. I read from the letter of the senators. The President's quite passive. He's not directing. He's not threatening. The senators are directing, and they're threatening, and they're warning. So the President says to the President of the Ukraine, who brings this stuff up, he says, yeah, Rudy's a good guy. I'm going to have him call you, and I'd like you to talk to the Attorney General, too. He doesn't say, I want you to get Biden. I want you to open a criminal investigation. I want to bring this guy down. Remember, he doesn't even know this is going to be made public.
Right. Yeah.
So what's the problem?
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. I mean, the tone, his tone is very different than Biden's tone in Biden's version of his conversation with the Ukrainians. It's very different than the tone that the senators sent to the Ukrainians on this issue. But I would go further, Mark, in saying that President Trump would be negligent if he did not bring this matter up. And here's why. Ukraine is one of those countries that has all sorts of problems. One of those problems is corruption. And it's one of those countries where you have a political class in the United States which sort of feasts off of opportunities to enrich themselves in countries like Ukraine. You could add Kazakhstan to that list. You could go to Nigeria. The point is, these are legitimate issues for a president to raise. And if the members of a family of the vice president of the United States are self-enriching and engaged in potentially criminal behavior, at a minimum corrupt behavior, it ought to be looked at. And the notion that somehow, he should take a hands-off approach, it's not legitimate to even mention Biden's name, is ridiculous.
And he's reading this. It's in the public press. It's in your book.
Yeah.
So Hillary Clinton, who in my view violated the Espionage Act repeatedly, she and her husband become enormously wealthy since they left the White House and so forth. You can't investigate her.
Right.
Because she's not running for anything anymore.
Right.
Joe Biden, who might run for something, you can't investigate him because he might run for something.
Right.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump is under nonstop investigation.
Right.
And that's okay. When you have politicians pressing prosecutors, pressing prosecution, accusing him of crimes and all, that's okay. But don't talk about Lunch Bucket Joe and his son.
Right.
Don Jr. said something to me the other day that is so true. Can you imagine if he'd been Hunter Biden? And can you imagine if the president had been Joe Biden and made that call? What do you think would have happened?
Oh, I think we all know what would have happened. I mean, imagine, we're going to talk about China in a minute, but imagine if Don Jr. flew over on Air Force One with his dad and inked a $1.5 billion deal, let's say in an area he has no background in, like telecommunications. Washington would be going ballistic. I would be going ballistic, and rightfully so. So it's a completely different circumstance in the way the response is, and that's what I think so infuriates people. There are certain people that are supposed to be protected. Biden seems to be one of those. When my book came out, hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. I did your radio show, did hits on Fox, got no contact whatsoever from the mainstream media.
And you write about Republicans in your book.
Absolutely.
But they don't want to hear.
No, they don't want to hear any of it. And part of it is there's a caste system in Washington, D.C. that they protect. And I think one of the reasons that there is so much animosity towards Trump, some of it's ideological, some of it's style or whatever, but a lot of it is he represents a massive disruption to the business model of Washington, D.C., which is you come in, you juice in your family, you juice in your friends, you serve in public service, you come out rich, and when you leave office, you cash in even further. He represents a threat and a challenge to that, and they don't like it. Lots of people from both political parties. So to me, this is the heart of the matter. If it's not possible to investigate Joe Biden now, then it's never possible to investigate him. All these things we're talking about, Mark, happened when he was vice president of the United States. His son flew with him on Air Force Two. He was the point person on critically important national security issues with foreign governments. And in those instances, there's only 2 countries where Joe Biden was point person for U.S. policy. And in both countries, his son just happened to cash in, getting paid huge sums of money in areas that he had no background or expertise. And yet, the media doesn't seem to think this is a big deal.
Donald Trump comes into government not to enrich himself. I'm sure he's lost money.
Yes.
Don Jr. has nothing to do with any of this. They try to drag him down. Eric Trump, Ivanka Trump, the whole Trump family.
Right.
They issue subpoenas like issuing lollipops, after you go to the dentist when you're a kid. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the Bidens, not one subpoena has been issued by either body of Congress, Republicans or Democrats.
Right.
When it comes to Hunter Biden, nobody wants to look at his bank account.
Right.
Nobody wants to interview his accountants. Nobody wants to do anything. And they've twisted this massive Biden corruption scandal into a Donald Trump scandal.
Right.
High crimes and misdemeanor. You know what? That's a bridge too far. The American people aren't going to buy this crap. When we come back, I want to talk about China. Folks, don't forget, most weeknights you can see me on Levin TV. Go to blazetv.com/Mark to sign up, blazetv.com/Mark, or give us a call at 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV. Don't forget, get your copy of Unfreedom of the Press and Secret Empires by my friend Peter Schweizer. We'll be right back. Peter, I want to talk to you about China. We've talked about it a little bit here and there. It's in the news a little bit here and there, but thanks to the media, that doesn't really explain it. What did you discover with respect to Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and others in Red China?
Well, China is the great marketplace that everybody seems to be going to, right? Or at least they were during the Obama administration. And the same thing applied with the Bidens. The story really begins in December of 2013. Joe Biden is going to Asia for a series of meetings. The center of those meetings is going to be with Chinese officials. And Hunter Biden is on Air Force Two with him. Now, you would look at the public accounts and think this was just sort of a social thing. But during the time that they were in Beijing, we don't really know what Hunter was doing. There's no schedule of his meetings. But Joe Biden was meeting with Chinese officials, and he was criticized by the Washington Post and others for being soft. The Chinese had erected these air defense zones in the South China Sea. They're making these territorial claims.